Welcome in, everyone, for a very timely and very special show. Many of you are getting your Cyber Awareness Month campaigns together. So communications are obviously on all of our minds. But how do we communicate cyber up and across the organization in ways that actually win engagement and influence behavior? Answering those questions today, I am thrilled to introduce you all to Jeffrey Brown, the veteran CISO who has literally written the books on leadership and communications and culture in cybersecurity. He's a veteran CISO for multiple Fortune 500 companies. He's the first and the longtime CISO of the state of Connecticut, and he's currently a security advisor at Microsoft. And it is so great to have you here, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Elliot. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation.
Well, I've been looking forward to this one for a long time because we had a great conversation a few years ago, and that was when we discussed your book, The Security Leaders Communication Playbook, and we have links to that book in the various emails and communications you all have arrived here by, and we'll make sure that you can all find his books because I very much recommend that book to anyone to read. There are not a whole lot of playbooks for communications for security leaders out there, and Jeff's is about the best I've read. So in order to get started, as a fellow former journalist, I appreciate your own path to where you are today. So maybe you could just introduce yourself and discuss your path a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And my background is actually in journalism, publishing, and English lit minor. So really like a lot of communication in my background. That said, when I decided to kind of take a job in IT, because IT was something that I just loved instinctively. My parents were working at IBM and we had computers all over the place. So there was a natural bridge there. I was working in a traditional publishing house, actually HarperCollins. And I ended up doing a lot of IT work there. I realized I really kind of preferred doing that. And I ended up kind of making that transition by teaching myself cybersecurity and really getting started back in the 90s, right? So almost like 30 years ago. Journalism was very interesting background for this because like when you take sort of a traditional writing kind of background, that's fine. But journalism is one of those things. It's like boot camp for writers, right? So we had to go out and we had to cover local elections. I had to cover a Rangers game once. I didn't know anything about hockey. It's like, well, you good? You better come back with the story or we're going to just put a picture of you on there saying I didn't get my work done. That's not a great way to do it, right? So we had a method of just crash coursing on things. And when you think about cybersecurity in particular, things change so fast. We have to get crash courses on quantum, on AI. We have all these things coming at us, and you can't just kind of stay stuck in 30 years ago, or else I'd be working on things like Novell NetWare, Banyan Vines, Token Ring, things like that are just not really current anymore. So, that ability to learn very quickly, but also be able to communicate it. One of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, right? And that's that to me is my gold standard for, do I understand it well enough that I can explain it to someone like they are a 5-year-old? If you've never done that with ChatGPT and things, that's a great way to practice that kind of a conversation. But a lot of times we end up having conversations with very senior business leaders, and they don't understand IT, they don't understand cybersecurity, and we start talking about EDRs and endpoints and things like that, and their eyes glaze over and they're not really understanding it. And we need to change our communication game too, because ultimately we end up saying things like, well, we need to increase our security posture. It's like, what does that mean, right? Like that's not actionable, it's not specific, it's just kind of words. And we need to be able to communicate a lot better in terms of what's our risks, what kind of things do we need to do to protect ourselves from those risks? And that whole communication background has really been, I think, a significant benefit to me, especially, incidents, everything. CISO jobs are one of the few where you have to communicate with everyone. So everyone from administrative assistants all the way up to the board of directors, the CEO, the CFO. We are one of the few jobs that has to communicate across every person in a company. Think about it. Maybe HR and the CEO, not too many other jobs really need to communicate to every single employee.
Yeah, you really are kind of like working as a journalist in a way, in communications in your job. So how important is communications in order to get that buy-in up and across the organization? How important is it to be able to communicate as opposed to just being a really great technical expert?
Yeah, it's critical because lately, especially even if you're a really good technician, the fact is you're probably, if you're doing anything important, you're going to be working with other areas, other groups. You have to be able to communicate with them and influence them. And, in cybersecurity, we have to sometimes talk to business leaders and explain why they need to patch applications that are custom built for the business, right? And that kind of a conversation is very difficult and very different than the one you might have with the actual people who are doing patching, right? Like you have to be able to kind of pivot from a very technical discussion to a much more business friendly discussion. And not everybody can handle that well. And it does take some practice. I mean, you have to really turn it into relatable things and make sure that you're connecting. And in communication, it's not just about talking, it's about feedback, and it's about actually connecting and making sure that the people that you're talking to are understanding what you're saying, not just hearing what you're saying. And I think that that's a big distinction. A lot of times people think that they've communicated, and the fact is they really haven't. And they also don't appreciate the fact that you're going to have to repeat things over and over again. A lot of our brains don't necessarily incorporate information that quickly. Yeah, I told you this once before. I mean, you hear that all the time with kids and stuff. It's, I already told you this. It's like you got to repeat things until it really starts sinking in. And sometimes that's 7 to 14 times, right? It's not just one or two.
So the last time we spoke, you were giving different kinds of basic concepts that underpin a good communication strategy and program. And you talked about concepts like BLUF, bottom line up front. And then you were also talking about knowing your audience, how to communicate to different audiences. As you just said, you have to communicate to everybody across the organization. And you kind of wrap that into a really nice metaphor about people don't buy airbags, they buy cars. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, sure. And it's cars are actually a really good example of how do I make security more relatable to somebody who doesn't really know much about security, right? So using metaphor is something that we can do to make things relatable. Most people already drive and they know what a car is and they understand what brakes and airbags do. I don't have to explain that like it's endpoint detection and response or DLP. It's like people don't know what that is, right? So the metaphor actually makes things a lot more simple to understand. We always tend to think as cyber professionals that people want the best security and security exists for its own sake. The reality is that a business has a function and a reason. And even if you work in government, there's a mission, right? There's always something. We're either selling products, we have a mission like Department of Social Services, things like that. But there's a reason that businesses exist, and it's not actually for cybersecurity. You're not going to run out and go buy a Porsche because it's got excellent brakes. But if it didn't have excellent brakes, the fact is that you could probably go maybe up to about 15 miles an hour without brakes and airbags and seatbelts, without getting too hurt if you're really careful. But, first of all, somebody can hit you. And second of all, you would never be able to get that car up to 100 miles an hour because if you had an accident, it'd be catastrophic. So we have brakes that are kind of like the prevention. We try to prevent accidents from happening by hitting the brakes. We have airbags and crumple zones as a mitigation in case an accident does happen. This is the very simple metaphor for layered controls. Why do we have so many security tools? Seatbelts are fundamental, right? Just it's like a baseline. Your diagnostics on the engine, check engine light is on. There's a problem with the car, and then in a really big problem, we have an incident response process called recalls. Right? There's a problem with the car. You've got to bring it back in. We have to fix it and remediate it, and then you can have it back again, good as new. It's a good and simple metaphor, I think, but like the reality is you might buy a car because it's more safe. I drive a Subaru, and they're known for their safety standards, and that's an added plus. But that's not why I bought the car. It's just one of the many benefits of buying that particular car. So it tends to be a good strategy, a good way to resonate with people and help them understand. Here's why we have so many different security tools. Here's kind of what they do. They prevent, they mitigate, they respond to things when they happen. And it's a really good way to just kind of connect with people and help them understand why is security so complicated.
Let's put that into practice now. Cyber Awareness Month is right around the corner. Everybody's scurrying to get their programs together. Maybe you can talk about some of the different things that you've done in your own past and that you recommend other people to do for Cyber Awareness Month, where you do have to communicate across the whole organization to all departments, all levels.
Yeah, it's a great question too, because culture is really where you start with that, right? Like, who are your people? In financial services, when I worked in financial services, most people knew how to use a computer. They had a pretty good technology background. State government's a little different, right? You may have people who are DMV clerks. You may have people working in hospitals. You can't take for granted what your culture is. So you always start with culture, like what's going to resonate, what do people need to know, and how can we make it simple, repeatable, and just very clear. I think in cybersecurity, we sometimes just want to educate everyone on everything. We love sharing information. We want everyone to be cyber literate. The fact is that you have to really start with the basics, and you have to really take a good, honest look at your own employee base and say, do they know how to report an incident? Yes, I have worked in corporations where the people didn't seem to have any idea. If I saw a problem, how do I report that? Right? Like, I mean, that's such a fundamental that you have to get right. That make sure that's covered in your training and awareness. Phishing links, that's great. Like, don't click on phishing links, but is that really the behavior you want to encourage, or do you want to encourage them to report phishing links, right? Because what'll happen is you'll never get phishing links down to zero. Somebody's always going to click on something, and that one person in the event of a real phish, that one person who reports it is going to save your from everybody else who's going to click on every single link that always comes into their inbox. I would also say that, again, tailoring the messages to different audiences. I think if you send some of those kind of basics, really simple basic stuff to the technology group, they're going to kind of tune out, right? Like, this is silly. We don't want to really pay attention to it. So try to make things as relevant as possible. I'm a developer. I'm a systems administrator. That's more work for you. And that's one of the key takeaways, I think, from this whole conversation, is that good communication means more work for you. If you really want to be able to connect to your audience and make sure that the message is clear and simple, you've got to work on it a little bit. You've got to refine it and make sure that you're using the right metaphors, that it's going to resonate with your culture, that you're keeping messages fairly concise and engaging, and that we're not just sending out like kind of 3-hour things and expecting everybody to sit through all of that. Everybody's busy, and they all have a different job than cybersecurity, but we want cybersecurity to be a small piece of their job. So think about the kind of things that you want your people to understand, the behaviors you want to reinforce, like reporting phishing, and make sure that the process is really simple and clear. I mean, I worked at an organization once where reporting a phish was so complicated, even my own team had to look up, well, we don't remember the address, that you have to create a new mail and create an attachment, put it on the other mail, and then send it to this address that we can't really remember. We had to work on that whole process and get that sort of one-click reporting button to make it as simple as possible. This is why Amazon is so successful, right? I just want that. I'm going to click on it, buy now, put it in my card, send it my way, make it really simple, and people will use it.
Yeah, relevance, simplicity, clarity, and behavior. Can you make this about a behavior? And you're definitely speaking my language right now about having a nice, simple, and clear process for reporting, because it's such a beautiful behavior that you can actually focus on, I think, in the Cyber Awareness Month. Do you have any examples of like a Cyber Awareness Month campaign that you might have run that you just remember that stands out to you?
Yeah, well, I do remember when we changed the process around phishing, that we really wanted to make sure that that was well known and well understood. But by doing that, we didn't want to necessarily highlight, like, here's this old process that nobody remembers anyway. You've muddied the message now, right? It's just that here's the process to report a phish, right? So we were very careful about, like, let's make this crystal clear. We're not saying, like, don't report it the old way. That still works. If you remember the old way, fantastic. There's now 2 ways to report a phish, but there's also a very simple way, and it's 1, 2, 3 steps max, right? Like, you want to just make sure that things are so clear that anybody in the organization can do it. That was really exciting for us too, because we had just made some of those changes. We were able to not only measure the results of the awareness, and the people have seen it and whatever, but we also saw a giant uptick. We had 1,000 people reporting to phish in the next phishing exercise. That was up from like 6. So that was a really good metric to be able to show.
That's a great example, actually. And we'll just sort of pause on the Cyber Awareness Month campaigns for that. It sounds like measuring results are kind of nice too. A nice part of a Cyber Awareness Month campaign.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we call a feedback loop. And a lot of times cyber communication is kind of one way. We send out an email, it goes out to people, and then we don't necessarily know, did people read it? Did they open it? If they opened it, did they understand it? being able to measure the actual behavior, such as, we had an increase in the number of people who are reporting phishes, and we can directly correlate that with our awareness message. That's really good. Now you're showing like there's a feedback loop. We did connect with people. We've changed behavior, because ultimately, I think training and awareness is about making sure that you're hardwiring people. You don't want them to just understand cyber concepts. You want them to make sure that they're also doing safe processes, safe operations. They know how to report a phish. They know who to call in an emergency. Those kind of messages need to be just very, very clear.
Yeah, and I want to remind the audience too that Jeff is not a Hawks Hunt user, and that this is a totally vendor neutral show today. But it really does warm my heart to hear that you basically had this focus on phishing that had such a great result, because it's something that we have seen a lot of people, whether they're Hawks Hunt people or not, really be able to show results to their board, to their executives, that there was some kind of a cyber awareness campaign about this, and there was a behavior central to that campaign that they were able to measure. So it's great to hear you validate that as the guru of cyber communications.
I love it. Now, one other thing I would just recommend is move away from first of all, phishing exercises are still good. We hear a lot in the industry about maybe we should stop doing these training exercises, and some people seem to get upset when they receive one and they accidentally click the link. That's what the training part is, right? This is part of a training exercise. We want you to be a little more suspicious. So sending these emails and receiving them, and even I have clicked on some of them. I hit something on a mobile device where you can't hover over the link. You got 30 things going on. You're at an airport. Yeah, sometimes even we kind of click on things that are really well crafted. And guess what? They're getting better crafted every day thanks to generative AI. We need you to be a little bit more on your toes. That's the reason that we send these things. We want to also avoid punitive, and that's, I think, also a really important concept in this kind of training, because what happens is you end up punishing people. You click the link, you're a bad employee. We're going to put this on your performance review, things like that. It's like, that's a bad day at work. That's a really bad day at work. And guess what? If I accidentally click something in the future, I'm going to want to hide it. And I'm just not going to want to tell anybody about it, because remember what happened last time? It wasn't such a good day. That is the wrong behavior that you want to encourage. Remember, we're hardwiring behavioral change. It takes time, it takes patience, and it also takes careful strategies that you've thought through. And I think reward punishment, always try to go with reward. Yes, sure. Certain times you end up with some individuals that need a little bit more handholding and a little bit more one-on-one attention. But we really do try, unless somebody's just utterly thumbing their nose at the program, you really don't want to. You want to avoid punishment. It's just not a good tactic. It's not an effective tactic.
Boy, you are absolutely preaching to the choir here. So completely agree that reward-based is going to be a lot more sustainable and a lot more effective than the punishment-based. That being said, I do remember that you had some experiences in some places before that were punishment-based. You had some pretty wild stories. I'm not sure if you can share an example of just like how draconian a punishment-based program can be, and I'd be curious how effective it was.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm going to bottom line up front, right? It was not effective. Now let's talk about why. So I'll give you two different examples. One was really where employees would receive a canned email, actually it was voicemail, from the CEO of the company, right? The chief executive officer, somebody who has nothing to do with IT. He owns the entire company soup to nuts, and he would send a canned voicemail that would say, basically, we strive to hire the best and brightest. You've fallen short of this. Ooh, that's a really painful message to receive, especially if it was like, look, I was just doing my job. I clicked on something by accident. I already feel bad about it. And now I get this. And there's just, psychology, even though it's just a canned message, you think it's not really doing that much harm. But psychology is like, I'm on some blacklist with the CEO now. He knows I did this. People really kind of incorporated in all the wrong ways. And there was another one where, the CEO of the company wanted to take away email for 2 weeks for people who had clicked on the link. And we had to really explain, like, you realize like your head of marketing did this. Like you have HR people. You can't literally take away email we had to, as the security people, come in and say, you need to dial that punishment back. You can't do that. First of all, if you have a 10-12% click rate, which is, that's a little high for some companies, but in an early phases of a phishing program, that's probably about average. You're talking about, so 1.5 of every 10 employees is going to lose their email for 2 weeks at a time and probably on an ongoing basis. Remember, you want to show trending with phishing. You want to show that that 12% is going down to 8%, down to 5%. Maybe we get it all the way down to 1 or 2%. If you get down to 0, you're probably making it too easy. You need to up your game, right? You don't want 0. A lot of people think that they want 0 phishing clicks. And it's like, look, with generative AI and all the kind of new tools that are coming out that are crimeware, crimeware as a service and things like that, the phishes are going to be fantastic. They're going to be deep fakes. You have to up your game. You want some level of progress, and you want your metrics to also show that you have some level of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very well said. That's great. One thing you've mentioned a couple of times here too is AI and generative AI and deepfakes and whatnot. Do you think that's something that's worth discussing? Is that something that people should know about? And
Yeah.
how would you express that?
Yeah, I think a lot of cases, some people don't really understand the power that some of generative AI has. I mean, everybody knows ChatGPT, right? That's fantastic. Did you know things like some of the voice generation that you can do now? We've even had Steve Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, kind of say that you really should not use voice authentication anymore. A lot of companies do, right? Like you call up a call center, you're trying to make a financial transfer, and it may say, "Oh, we already recognize your voice. We're happy to go." Your voice is no longer a good biometric. Things like that are changing very rapidly, and we need to be able to keep on top of that stuff and make sure that we're communicating it as well. We've actually done things like, especially at Microsoft Live demos, in terms of, here's a guy who looks like an average guy off the street. Here's Morgan Freeman. Here's both of their mouths in perfect sync and perfect harmony. Which one is fake, right? And then we kind of leave it up to you. And sometimes the answer is surprising. We love doing those kind of little spot checks. They're kind of fun, actually. It's like, can you spot which one is the deep fake? Which one do you think is the deep fake? You can gamify these kind of things, and people actually find it pretty engaging. But it also helps demonstrate that it's getting trickier, right? Like the fishes have better grammar. They don't have as many mistakes. Voice recognition is now bad. Video, right? Usually people think like, oh, I saw this in a video, therefore it must have happened. It's like, we're gonna have to start questioning a lot of things, maybe even everything, and make sure that things are real. And the only real thing that saves you from that is good business process, right? It's really about like, hey, somebody who called, they sounded like the CFO, they asked for this urgent wire transfer. What happens next, right? And what happens next is a business process.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you can build that into your Cyber Awareness Month campaign also. Make sure you know those business processes. Make sure you know if you get that feeling, then you really need to take that extra step to verify.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to get trickier.
Yeah, yeah,
That's why we call it training and awareness. We want you to be aware of the issue, but we also want you to practice. And I think, that training piece is pretty important.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, so Cyber Awareness Month is coming up, but I've heard this rumor that cybersecurity threats and attacks don't stop after October. So, first of all, is that true? And second of all, if that's true, how do you take all those learnings and all that momentum that you've developed during October and make it a 12-month long thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, security isn't a sort of an annual exercise during the month of October. And an awareness program should be comprehensive, right? That should include maybe courses. It should include live one-on-one sessions. It can include posters, things that we put up around the office. You should really think through like a comprehensive training and awareness program. A lot of times we do tend to do a ton of activity in October and we don't really build on it, making it sort of a checkbox activity, which isn't really good. Again, I think with communication in general, but especially communication about topics you're not that clear on, like a lot of people aren't clear on cybersecurity. So they're going to have to hear the same messages a lot. Remember how to report an incident, right? Like, because employee churn happens too. I mean, people come and go. We've hired new people. We've let some people go. You need that constant training. It can't just happen in October, or else you're really going to be behind the curve. And making it as easy to digest and as understandable as you can is really what's going to help you the most. And again, sometimes technical employees, they want a lot more detail, and more businessy employees want a lot less detail. And you have to be kind of cognizant of like, hey, if we have a remote workforce that never travels anywhere, maybe we don't really need to send them, training and awareness messages just because it comes as a canned message on how to travel safely. It's like, well, if your employee base largely doesn't do that, then that's not necessarily something you want to focus on. Focus on things that actually happen. And really a great way to do this is to tie in incident response, right? Like I noticed that are the incident response numbers, we've lost a lot of laptops lately. Maybe we should do an awareness message on how to travel safely with the laptop, right? So now you're really making it an incorporated part of the program, not just a check the box separate activity. We have to do awareness because that's good cybersecurity hygiene. Yeah, it's better cybersecurity hygiene when everything's integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep it relevant. Keep it relevant to the risk itself. That's a great example of that too. Are people using their USBs too much? So that's a great point. And let's get into it. Let's get into some of these different strategies and basics that you've put together in your playbook. You have a presentation that I believe that you are ready to share. Is that right?
Yeah, let me do that. Okay, are you seeing my screen?
Yes. Crystal clear.
There we go. Fantastic. Okay, yeah, I'd love to talk about in a little bit more depth, and I do think sometimes in communication, visual is sometimes a really valuable thing. So a picture is worth 1,000 words, and smaller words and digestible format like a PowerPoint can certainly help drive a conversation. So let's talk about the new mandate for security leaders, and I think this is something that's always been there, but it's just getting a lot clearer now that security is a business issue and that communication and that influence across the organization and especially soft skills at the executive table, being cognizant and empathetic of the fact that business leaders don't know, their eyes glaze over if you've ever said like, oh, we need endpoint security. It's like they don't know what an endpoint is. Like, what are you even talking about? Making sure that you're really connecting with the audience and that you're at the right level. Sometimes you have a mixed audience and you have to, in cases like that, you might explain things like, well, we have an EDR, which is something very simple that sits on every single computing resource in the company. You kind of explain it very simply and resist the temptation to go into big detail, especially if your audience is not interested and they don't need to know that. If they're curious about it, that's fine. Fantastic. Your mindset, I think, is also just very important here too, because I'll see leaders who are just like, well, I'm not really good at presenting, I'm not good at public speaking, and it's like, well, guess what? I was also born the same way as you. I was not good at it until I did it a lot, and once I did it a lot, it's something that I became very comfortable with to the point where I could go into a conference where people knew me, and they'd say somebody didn't show up today. Would you mind filling in for them? And I'd say, absolutely not. It's a pleasure. What's the subject? I haven't even figured out what the subject is, right? Yeah, I mean, so yeah, you get to that point, not because you're a natural, not because you're, kind of born for this sort of thing. In fact, I'm a very high level introvert. I think a lot of people in journalism are. That it's not a comfort zone necessarily, but it's a muscle memory, right? So your mindset of just improving your own communication and making sure that it's connecting and critiquing yourself sometimes, right? Like, I mean, I've had sessions where you can't be 100% all the time, every time, right? You're going to have some stumbling blocks, learn from them and try to incorporate them. We talked a little about knowing your audience, and I think that we should probably talk a lot about it because it really is the most important thing. Why are you communicating at all? How are you communicating? All of those kind of things come into play here. And I know a lot of times IT people, especially, we default to our favorite way of communicating, which is probably either sending you an email or a text or anything that does not require a face-to-face conversation, because sometimes people just, I don't want to do that. He's a difficult person. I don't want to talk to him. You're not going to really connect with people that way, right? So making sure that you're using the right medium, and then that you're sending the right message to the right audience. So in some cases, like if let's say you have to let an employee go, that's not a text message, right? That's hopefully an in-person conversation, hopefully a one-on-one conversation. And yet we still see companies that are, hey, everybody dial into a Zoom meeting because 90 of you are being let go. Wow, that's just not a great way to communicate and not really a great way to operate in general. So making sure that you're translating, making it understandable, and then especially with C-level executives, we did talk about BLUF a little bit earlier on, which is bottom line up front. But that is probably one of the really things that'll increase everybody's communication very simply. You speak to C-level executives, they are busy. They're pulled into 100 different directions. If you're talking to a typical CIO, he's got to make sure that the trains are running, that new stuff is getting built, that security and scalability and all the things he has to worry about. Now we're going to talk about cybersecurity. And if you start with kind of just a lot of technical detail instead of what your bottom line is, I've been in CIO conversations, they get pulled out, they get interrupted, and you're halfway through your conversation and they're gone. You didn't get your bottom line up front, and now now the conversation's kind of over. You're going to have to start it from the beginning again. Whereas in some cases, I've had conversations with CIOs, you put your bottom line up front and they say, that's a great idea, make it happen. They don't really want to hear anymore. They're done. You can actually have a very simple conversation sometimes by putting that bottom line up front. Building influence across the organization. I mean, the relationships that you create, especially going into a new company. I've been into several new companies over my career, many times really not knowing a single person. You know, you go into a place like with 300,000 employees in 120 countries. I've been in 2 companies like that where I didn't know hardly anyone. You have to build those relationships before a crisis happens and before you're, because security has to, again, go across multiple divisions, multiple areas, and we have to lead by influence. And that means that you don't wait until there's a problem and say, hey, networking, you have to go do this. That may not be their priority. They have their own set of priorities. So making sure that we have that influence across the organization is how we get stuff done. And ultimately, I think most CISOs are measured, by how they do get things done. Making risks real and actionable. I think we talked a bit about framing cybersecurity as a business risk and not just an IT risk. We still see that kind of mentality over the years where it's like, well, the security group handles that, right? And they haven't really hit the point where I can tell you one thing, the board of directors now does understand this, right? We talk about personal risk on the board of directors. And there's a myth in cybersecurity that the business doesn't understand risk. And it's like, of course they understand risk. They understand credit risk. They understand market risk. They understand operational risk. Guess what? Cybersecurity is part of operational risk. It's part of running a business. So yes, they do understand risk. What they don't understand necessarily is technology and maybe cybersecurity. But when you put things in the right terms and you instead of saying like, I need to patch this critical vulnerability because it's really important. Now you're saying like, well, our claims processing system needs to be patched because ultimately if it's down, we'll be fined by regulators and we're going to suffer consequences, dollars per minute that system is down. When you can put things in that context, suddenly they understand risk really well. All right, metrics, another favorite. I've seen a lot of just weird things with metrics. People going into board conversations, they've got 40 slides and 15 minutes to get through them. They're just a mass of everything that we can measure. I like to give metrics a job. All your metrics should have a job, whether they're telling a story about progress, such as our phishing metrics, going from 30% click rate down to 5, right? That's a good story to be able to tell. And to do it, you need to capture more than a month, right? You need to make sure that you're capturing aggregate metrics and that you are telling either a story or you're driving a behavior or you just give them some level of a job to do and avoid those vanity metrics like, oh, 5 billion attacks happened that got blocked. It's like, well, who cares? The point I would give to make your metrics really shine is think in business terms of so what. And if you can't give so what, like here's a metric, it's 90% whatever. If you can't get someone to care about that and say so what, you need to either go back and make sure that the metric is worth tracking at all, or you need to make sure that your story that goes along with it is also more accurate. And I see a lot of things with should we do quantitative, qualitative? Do both where you can, right? Like I show 90% might be yellow. I want it to be 95%, which is going to be green. Everybody gets red, yellow, green, and yet putting a number to it actually makes it pretty powerful. It's like how did you get there? Because typically, especially in regulated firms, if you say yellow, audit comes in and they say red, now you have an argument and you can't really show how did you get yellow, how did they get red, right? So being able to combine both qualitative and quantitative metrics is a really powerful thing to do. All right, let's talk a little about crisis communication. Now this is a very interesting subject because this is what will test most CISOs the most. How you react in a incident with calm and clarity, hopefully, and in some cases not, right? So I mean, this is one that you really want to pay attention to. That preparation is key. Having a tested incident response plan. One of the first things I always do in a new CISO job is I always go right straight into incident response. What are our plans? What are our processes? Have they been tested? Have we done tabletops? Because guess what? Not only can they happen anytime, but once before I'd actually joined, it was about a week before my start date, I had the CIO call me and say, Jeff, we have a problem. Would you mind helping me on it? I hadn't even started the job yet, and an incident is now unfolding. So really you want to make sure that you have plans. And if not, you want to start immediately working on that stuff. You don't want to do it in the heat of the moment. Communication is really difficult in this scenario because everybody wants information. You're going to have very senior people who are hitting you up and saying, I want to know what happened and what else they did. And the reality is that anybody who's actually been through a real incident is that you only know what you know right now. That means that you're going to continue on. There may be, oh, we discovered that this goes a little deeper than we thought, or they did a little bit more than we thought, or maybe it wasn't as bad as we thought. All of those scenarios happen all the time. So you want to really make sure that you're communicating only the facts, not speculating, even when they push you for it, right? You have to be able to kind of say like, well, that's speculation. We don't know right now. And we have to get the facts first. You want to be really factual. And I think this is another place where good journalism comes into play because you just don't want to report opinions. You don't want to report speculation. You want to report facts. So only the things that you actually know, regardless of how many people are pressuring you for more. And then capture those lessons learned to drive continuous improvement. A lot of people will get through an incident and they won't say, well, wait a minute, how did this happen? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? And how do we, more importantly, build it right back into preparation and the tested incident response plan so that we can make sure that we have that full continuous loop of, here's what happened in the real world. Here's what went wrong. Here's what went right. And better yet, also, like what happened that was right, but it only was right by chance, right? Like what could have gone wrong that we didn't even plan for, because those kind of things have a habit of repeating over time. All right, then culture is another one. Culture is really interesting because it will either eat your strategy for breakfast or it'll be a force multiplier. And if you go against culture, I could tell you it's going to eat your strategy for breakfast. But if you build with the culture and you work with the culture that you have, it is something that will be a force multiplier. So what you want to do is, first of all, we talked about punitive before, right? Psychological safety is the opposite of that. So fostering an environment of just psychological safety, right? We know that people make mistakes. We're not looking to fire you. We're not looking to, cause problems with our employees. We actually want to encourage you to report and learn and foster that kind of, work together kind of environment, not just like, oh, those security people. I've had people who say like, oh, security, oh my God, why are they here, right? They're already cringing when you walk in the door. It's like, no, we want you to actually be partners. We want to actually work with you so that we can talk about things in your business and understand how it operates. Rewarding the positive behaviors and in fact gamifying them is also very interesting. We used to give out little like kind of phishing trophies for people who reported the phish, right? And again, we would go back to we want to encourage the right behavior. It's not just not clicking. A lot of times people won't click and they delete the email. They pat themselves on the back and say, job well done. Job better done would have been report that phish, then delete the email, and then you kind of move on. That is the behavior you want to do. And if you can reward and recognize it, that's the behavior you're going to get because people tend to talk too. I mean, we have these little phishing trophies and it'd be sitting on someone's desk and I'd be like, what's that? Where did you get it from? And they would start, just kind of telling them like, well, I did the right behavior and here's what the right behavior is. Now people are talking to each other. Guess what? Employees are running your awareness program for you. That's fantastic. That's the force multiplier effect. And then finally, investing in your team's growth and resilience too. This one I would say it applies directly to people who manage teams. And I get into arguments with CISOs all the time. I'm like, well, we can't find the right people and training them is a waste of time. It's like, it's never a waste of time. Even in state government where the general view is that we train people and then they go into private industry. So what? So what? You have people for 3 years, you get them 3 years smarter, and now they're working better, and they go and they manage their own career, which is something that's fine. It's never a problem when an employee wants to go manage their own career and go do something else. And we never try to stand in the way of that. But investing in their growth makes sure that if you do have the same employee for 20 years, that they're 20 years smarter at the end of that, that they are a cybersecurity expert at the end of that. All right, board and executive engagement. This is also what we call high stakes conversations. I had a CISO once who he called this board meeting his quarterly job interview. And what he meant by that was, am I going to keep my job? It's going to be based on these conversations. These are super high stakes conversations. I actually know of a deputy once who was brought into the board to replace a long-standing CISO, and it didn't go very well. And suddenly he wasn't really the deputy anymore. And it can be a career-ending conversation if not handled correctly. I mean, the board is very powerful, obviously, but they're also just like you and I. I sit on a few boards. They're just people. Making sure that you're actually communicating to them and speaking the language of risk and value and strategy. The board is going to be at a 50,000-foot view. So they don't want to see like, here's 30,000 vulnerabilities that need to be patched. That's not really something that's going to resonate too much. And in fact, could backfire. It's like, well, why haven't you taken care of this? The board is going to ask very simple and concise questions, and they're going to want very simple and data-driven answers, that directly answer the questions. And sometimes those questions are really tough. I had a board once ask about why don't we just patch everything everywhere and be done with it, right? And it's a great question from a business leader, and it's a sensible question. And if you were going to give the wrong answer, you might just say, that's the CIO's job. Sure, I agree. I think we should do that. But the reality is if you've ever worked in operations, you know that that's not a practical strategy. It would, I think, really harm the relationship with you and the CIO, and it wouldn't get done anyway, right? So at the end of the day, patching is something that needs to be kind of a risk-based thing, and we had to explain like very carefully why, while being a good idea, was not very practical. So, I mean, these conversations are very high stakes, high risk, and you need to handle things very carefully. But you also need to be transparent and truthful. So I think where some people do get into trouble is if they misrepresent things to the board. You really do need to be candid, concise, and clear and factual. So also, actually, let's go back to that for 1 second. But I mean, I will also say that the other thing is, and this goes for training and awareness in general too, stop trying to educate everyone on everything about cybersecurity. I mean, for boards, typically they love hearing about incidents that have happened either in our industry or at our company or at a competitor. They like hearing about progress and the investments that they're making into the cybersecurity program. But resist the urge to try to teach them every single thing. I mean, I see people trying to let me explain what an EDR is, and we're going to go into a lot of detail, but at the end of it, you'll understand what it is. It's like, that's not the point. The point is to communicate what your strategy is, not necessarily what each little technology piece is. But over time, you can really educate the board on the important things that they really do need to know. And that needs to be done not in one meeting, not in 2 meetings, but in several meetings over a period of time. Let's talk a little about what I call communication superpowers. And practice makes progress here, right? So again, you cannot be 100% all the time at every single communication. I never am. I don't think anybody really is, unless you've really practiced a lot. So if you have a board discussion as an example, and you haven't practiced even a little bit, you're probably going in at a big disadvantage. You want to really make sure that your messages are clear and that they're concise, and that, explain it to your spouse, right? Like, it might be something that, do you understand what I'm saying? Is a really good benchmark, unless your spouse also works in cybersecurity, to make sure that you're going to connect and that they're going to understand what the message actually says. Active listening is the number one. I mean, I think in terms of communication, the more you listen, there's a reason we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. The more that you're going to listen, the more that you're going to understand the other side. And guess what? That really helps in things like negotiations. It helps in, being able to communicate risk and also to put it into context with the business. I sit down with business leaders all the time, and they love sharing. How does this business run? How do you run? How do you run your department? How can I help? what a great conversation. You can have that in about 15 minutes with somebody. And typically they really do like sharing about, this is how my business operates. This is what we do. This is what's important to us, right? That's all feedback that you can now take back. And if you're doing all the talking, you missed all of the really interesting tidbits to take away. Storytelling, we kind of talked about that already, but I mean, it's going to just resonate a lot more if I said we need cybersecurity controls versus putting it into a, more of a story about what happened to one of our competitors when they didn't have cybersecurity controls, which can be very interesting. I mean, think about third-party risk, right? Is it more powerful for me to say you need third-party risk because it's really important? Or is it more better story to talk about the Target HVAC kind of issue, where we had a third party who was not vetted properly? It's just a much more powerful and contextual way for them to remember what is sometimes a little bit of ambiguity, right? It's like, well, why do we need third-party security? There's reasons. Negotiation, again, if you haven't listened, you're gonna stink at negotiation because you don't really understand what the other side wants. But a lot of times we do have to do that kind of negotiation. We need to make sure that that other areas are bought in, that they have the time to make your priorities their priorities, and also saying no strategically also puts some good roadblocks, I think, in the way. You don't want to be the department of no. I don't misunderstand what I'm saying with that, but saying no to things that are not that important to the business when you're in alignment. There's a lot of stuff that cyber people can be working on, and sometimes you got to say no to certain things that are not as important. Like as an example, if I don't have patching under control, I'm not going to spend a lot of time writing policies and standards, right? Because we need to get the more urgent issue done first. And if we're trying to do 100 different things all at once, you're really dividing your attention too much to actually make progress on the important things. All right, just to, kind of near a quick wrap up here, but communication tips as we are in October, Cybersecurity Month, this is a great time to practice communication and make sure that you're using things like storytelling to make things memorable. Make sure that you're tailoring your message, employing the analogies, and reinforcing positive security behaviors with actionable steps, right? Again, you're ultimately rewiring employees to do and behave differently in the future, right? Not clicking on fishes, reporting incidents as they happen, being safe with laptops, right? This is not something you could just send a couple emails and it's like, oh, we're done. This is a program that needs to persist over time, and that you're repeating messages so that people come and go and they understand what's actually our policies, and then also making them just concise and engaging for maximum impact. Too many times I see these long CBT kind of based courses. They are like an hour and a half or 2 hours. We're going to make everybody go through it. That's great. I mean, sometimes you're in a regulated environment and have to do that, but little bite-sized training works really good too. And, things that are just a little bit more engaging. In some cases, we do stories and things like that at Microsoft even, and people actually look forward to, like, I can't wait to see what happens next in the next session, next training. That's really good feedback to know that your program is on the right track, right? People are actually looking forward to hearing more. All right, so that sort of brings us to the end of the conversation for that. But security leaders who do communicate better drive better success. There's no doubt about that. They also have stronger influence, and to get there, you need to invest in your own growth and make sure that you are practicing. You jump on every speaking engagement you can. If you have a chance to get in front of the board, even if you're before being a CISO, I mean, even just being a listener and just watching how that works and operates. These are all different areas where you can sort of practice communication, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I think that the future belongs to the security leaders who can align with the business and drive change in the business. I think that's the ultimate thing there. And if you're not communicating well, you're not going to do it well.
Jeff, this was awesome. I appreciate it, and I guarantee you the audience has appreciated it. And I don't know how much time you have left. I want to give you an opportunity to tell everybody about your books. And then I did have one question kind of came up in my mind there, but do you have an extra 5 minutes now?
Sure do.
One question that occurred to me was, we talk a lot about how to communicate to boards and how to communicate to the employees, the end users. As a CISO, what do you like to see communicated to you from your security awareness leaders?
Yeah, that's
these comms programs and whatnot.
Yeah. And, again, I think the concept of feedback loop is really important, because what that really means is did this resonate or not? In some cases, we might even do a really short survey, because people hate surveys. Don't make it like 5 questions and they're all fill in the blank kind of things. It's like, yeah, just ask a couple of questions. Did you like this training? If you don't mind, what didn't you like about it? That is a bit of a writing question, but that feedback loop in terms of what's resonating, what's working, and what's not working, right? Like, hey, you sent out this awareness message the other day. I couldn't really understand what was in it, right? That's a feedback loop. And we have a saying at Microsoft that feedback is a gift. Whether it's good or bad feedback, it's a gift, because you can make change based on feedback. And I think that's a really useful thing. So I never look even at bad feedback. It's like, thank you for the feedback. You either have to take it seriously, or sometimes you do have to consider the source and say, like, is this accurate feedback, right? And sometimes that takes self-reflection, because a lot of times you think you're doing a great job, but if people are saying you didn't, the perception is reality. That's kind of how we look at that.
Yeah, that's a great insight. That's a great answer to that. I know a lot of people who are putting out their communications, who are putting out their security awareness programs. They often struggle communicating the results to your level, to the CISO level, much less to the board level as well. So that's a great answer. Okay, well, that does bring us to the end of this, but make sure to check out Jeff's books. And Jeff, could you please tell everybody about your books and where to find them?
Sure. First of all, you can find them off of Amazon.com, or you can go straight to Rutledge at CRC Press. But two books that might be of interest to this audience. One is obviously the Security Leaders Communication Playbook. You notice I did not call it the CISO's Communication Playbook, because I want this to be for all security leaders. Everybody in security needs to communicate better, and I didn't want to make it just sometimes you make it just CISOs. I was really amazed to be on a call the other day. I had asked a fairly wide audience of cyber professionals, how many of you are aspiring to CISO roles? I got a few maybes. I got a lot of no's. CISOs are really interesting roles, but people are starting to get concerned about burnout and personal responsibility and liability, things like that. If those are concerns, I wrote another book called Leading the Digital Workforce for people who manage teams in IT. It's not necessarily security specific, although there are certainly a lot of security examples in there. It's really about IT leadership and how it's different from general leadership, and what kind of things, and part of the strategies in that book are, how do I manage myself first? Because if I'm not coming here and I'm not giving my full attention, I'm not listening, I'm not really hearing what you're saying, I'm not going to be an effective leader either. So for anybody looking to up their game in IT leadership and especially cybersecurity leadership, that's a really good book to read. I make my books actionable and highly useful. Don't get scared of the communicate. I never thought I'd be writing a communication book. It was just a weird set of circumstances, but I asked myself, what's the one thing I can do to help everybody else? And to me, it had to be not a theory book on what good communication is. I mean, who wants a book on that? I wanted one that was really going to be, immediately useful and actionable. So that's what I strive for in all of the books that I write.
Well, you are one of the most natural communicators I've really engaged with before at the CISO level. So I can not recommend it enough to the audience here. It's the Security Leaders Communication Playbook is a fantastic book. Get it off of Amazon or off of Rutledge. And I look forward to reading Leading the Digital Workforce. I look forward to reading that as well.
Very good.
Okay. Well, hey, you have given us a lot to think about, and we appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Jeff, and I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, great.